Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Bob here at your Vitality Project with my friend and esteemed guest, Michael Morar.
Hey, Bob. How's it going?
It's going okay. Yeah, it's good to see you too, Michael. Michael,
by the way, your camera looks, do you have a new camera?
No. Why?
The video looks especially sharp.
Thank you. It could be because I'm coming out of a few days of illness, and so I'm just radiating health. Thank you. No, it's kind of you to say that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Our topic, Michael, as you and I were talking about before we started tonight, is looking at what happens once I'm sober. And honestly, much of the work I do is with people that's the biggest question. They're in very early recovery from oftentimes severe addiction. Oftentimes to opiates, if not to opiates, to methamphetamine, sometimes alcohol, but just getting sober is the task at hand. But what I was interested in looking at, I'll be moving into this over the next few weeks, are what are some of the life skills that we can develop to move into healing relationships if they're in need of being addressed. I think it takes some kind of body and brain stability to even approach that one. That's such a live wire, as you and I both know. And also, what can I do to begin to create more of a sense of being able to trust myself? I'm working on a piece right now on what I'm calling the relapse time bomb. Just tick, 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 tick.
Yeah.
So what can we do to develop some confidence that we're not just going to fall off the edge of the earth tomorrow or in the next minute? And so I just wanted to open up. I'm thinking of it as almost like phase one recovery, which would be just getting sober. And that's no easy task. Obviously, it's not. But phase two would be looking at more advanced recovery. And frankly, I'm more interested in that. And I suspect you might be too, by virtue of, among other things, by our respective backgrounds in clinical psychology. I'm very interested in what we can do to help ourselves to live not just sober lives, but actually robust, flourishing lives. And so all of that, and just wherever we go, Michael, it's 20 minutes with you is a pleasure, and it'll be a gift to our audience.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to talk to you too. I like, always enjoy our conversations.
Yeah,
but I think what comes to mind initially is around, in phase one, the singleness of purpose could be helpful, around just, not drinking or using. Maybe that singleness, if it is useful, it would be there.
I'm laughing with you. You and I have been in meetings together in the past where this particular thing came up, and you saw me get activated around it. So it can go sideways in a nanosecond for me. Yeah.
I think that was informing my giggle as well.
Yeah, I know. I had mine too. I'm having a little bit of a combination of a laugh and kind of a post-traumatic response. It didn't go well, I think. And it was probably on this point actually. Is this singleness of purpose? It feels like it can get so narrowed down to where that becomes the object of our entire existence. And I don't know, I battle against that. And I take sobriety very seriously, but there's something about turning it into the reason for my being that I even myself in early recovery had a hard time getting bored with that. I was in meetings with people that would talk about how they got so years ago, and I thought, why are they talking about that 40 years later? That was depressing for me personally to imagine that would be me from 40 years from now. 40 years from now, I'll be dead, so it's irrelevant. But whatever. I realize I step on people's toes, even probably in saying that. But I've always been this way. I just felt like, isn't there a bit more? Anyway, I'm interrupting you. I want to.
No. I mean, there's no interrupting here, And so I guess it makes, I think we might have mentioned something about this even last time we talked, which is that most of the people that I've met with and around addiction and talked to, using or, drinking or using is really just something that's helped them get through it in some way, or it's been a symptom of, I won't say helped it. it's also caused problems, but seemingly helped them get through it. And maybe at some point was helpful, then turned not so helpful. But most of the time I found that people were experiencing trauma, and people were experiencing just depression, anxiety. And that really, I think, is speaking to kind of what you're bringing up here, is like kind of that, how to work through that stuff. I think is really where the real work is. And to me, that's why I find the singleness of purpose can be limiting in terms of how are we thinking and talking about this, that's not, that the primary focus isn't just addiction or using, it's that addiction and using was a product of generally of something else.
I remember when I was an undergraduate studying psychology, and I was in a very learning theory oriented program. I had one of my faculty who I liked a lot. In his office, he had a photograph of him with B.F. Skinner's arm around him. They were buddies. And that was my imprinting on psychology in any depth early on. And the dismissing of the so-called black box, which was all of the thoughts and feelings. And this was radical behaviorism. It was really focused on changing the behavior, and it serves great value, for sure. But I think, it took me getting into graduate school and getting into clinical practice to begin to realize that, as valuable as that is, it's so partial and oftentimes really problematic. I was introduced later to this idea of symptom substitution as I began to study other theories. And I think of it as the whack-a-mole approach, is that you and I both know this, is that if we can solve my addictive behavior or any other problematic way of coping, if we can solve it through this door, then it ends up coming through another door sometimes. And I think it's the oversimplification of it. Like you say, the singleness of purpose. I don't know that life has all that much singleness in it, truthfully.
Right. I mean, we'd all love it. We all like it too. It's not I'm not sure any problem that we face comes under the category of singularity or singleness. It's usually the multipleness of it that causes it to be a problem, I think. And it's also, I think, kind of what you're talking about in terms of the deeper work or the additional work to be done, is that, just don't do, like in terms of drinking or using, just don't do that. Is, it might get you so far, but it's not really sustainable. And I think what you're talking about is more.
That's the point. That as I feel, it's one of the ironies, because I feel like if I don't have an intact brain, then it's kind of a moot point to talk about what I do. And I know that for me, in not only an active addiction, but early recovery, so-called post-acute withdrawal syndrome, I had 9 months of not being in my right mind, most of which I didn't recognize at the time. It came to me, you kind of look back and go, oh, that's what that was. But I really
like whose brain was that?
Yeah, exactly. You could rightfully have said I was possessed, and so it's not that just don't do it is superfluous. It really matters to stop fucking drinking, to stop fucking drugging. That's the crazy thing about it. It's that when it stops there, once I've stopped there, let's say for me with pause symptoms, post-acute withdrawal, that after 9 months, then what? Because I stopped and my cravings diminished significantly. I don't know that I was out of the woods by any stretch, but it was that now I earned the right, I think, just to have enough brain integrity to begin working on things like relational stuff. I mean, it was huge for me. I was really incapable of doing that work, particularly with Colleen, my wife now, for those 9 months. And she'd be here to vouch for that. Because I wasn't all that conscious of the fact that I was so limited. Everybody else was. So it's something about that. So it's not about going light on the active addiction. It's not about going light on that. It's just about not stopping there. Else it just feels way too partial. And I see a lot of that in the recovery world. It's really of concern to me.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm also thinking about meaning in some way. I guess values and meaning come to mind. Meaning, like what meaning are we ascribing to our use, and what values might it be contradicting that we know are important to us? Because I think that if anything kind of can move us away from our values, that drugs and alcohol can. And so sometimes when we realize that we're misaligned with the values and the things that are important to us, that can then shift the meaning of using or not using. And then I think that that's what fuels longevity or sustainability.
It's good. It's good.
In terms of like what really matters to us.
Yeah.
And so for me, it was like personal freedom and autonomy. And I realized there's nothing right now in my life that's threatening to take away my autonomy more than drinking. And so, I mean, I guess that's probably the top line of that story, which is like, but that for me was a significant shift.
Yeah.
That made the rest of it sustainable.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. You know, I ask clients and groups these questions, and you and I have been in these groups together, Michael. I ask clients, how many of you have violated something that's really core to you in terms of a central, like, moral value or principle? How many of you have done that in active addiction? And there's no question, every single person, every group will raise their hand. And we talk about how that can even happen. And that's a very valuable piece to examine, because, you know, you look at realize that you violated yourself in multiple ways, violated relationships. It's horrific. How can one live with oneself? That's a huge challenge to recovery, for sure. And I like very much, I just did this, it's so funny, I just did it earlier today in a group, and then I had a group facilitator training this afternoon with somebody the group was yesterday, and the group facilitator training was today. And he was complimenting me on how I had shifted the conversation into asking people, I don't remember how I did it, but he said, the way he was struck by the way, he's a fellow graduate of your program, by the way. I've asked him if he knows you. He knows people that you know, but he doesn't know you. He said he appreciated the way that I moved into asking people, what are you living for? You know, what are you living for? It's at what you're saying around value. What gets taken away in terms of my living true to myself. But also at the end of the day, like you said, with autonomy, it's like, what's a value that's going to be strong enough to fight the fire of addiction with a greater fire? And that's what we talked about yesterday. And it was really moving, because in this group, every single person, it was a men's group, every single man, a participant, was able to do something really substantive that made recovery worth it for them. It was really beautiful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, me too, thinking about, you know, if problems stand tall, you know, especially addiction as a problem, meaning that they're powerful, you know, it's a powerful problem amongst problems, I would say. And so what are we gonna kind of have in hand, or what are we gonna go up against this with? And what better thing than kind of values, and what do you stand for? What matters to you? What's important to you? And what's important enough to take a different path here, or to change your relationship to substances?
Yeah. I remember for me the it was a twin thing for me, the twin horror. One of the things, my version of autonomy was the absolute loss of an internal locus of control. Just being chemically addicted scared the living daylight out of me. It was really disturbing. And I'm not sure I'd ever had quite that experience for a sustained way with anything or anybody. It was just chemistry. Can you hear this dog barking out here?
Yeah, but I think it was in the background till you mentioned it.
He's chiming in. I like to kind of keep it real, you know. We get some crickets and an owl in a few minutes, you know.
Yeah.
He's literally right outside my door. I want to make sure it wasn't overwhelming. So part of it was the loss of autonomy, loss of internal locus of control. I think the other was, I was just, as we were sitting here quietly together, there was this deep sadness about the life unlived. Just felt like this is going to be the final, final testimony of my life, is just kind of going out with a whimper. And it was very painful to me. I just didn't feel like that this was why I was here, was to see how high I could be until I died. It was really painful to me. And I couldn't, I felt like I could access like one little smidgen of my potential in most interactions and whatever work I was able to do. And so it was just so limited. It was so painful to me. So there was is that implying that as painful as it was, that's also what fueled you in some ways? Yeah, in a way you could think of it in terms of negative reinforcement. I didn't like how that felt, but I want to take it more like you are talking about, I think, Michael, which is that the flip side of that is that I have a lot that I want to bring to the world yet. And that has fueled my continued recovery, sobriety, striving to be healthy and grow, and all of that. It's fueled that it's to contribute. It's a very deep value. I grew up in a family of there were such limitations in my family, as you know. My God. But I grew up in a family of service providers. I just happened to be a healthcare service provider. So my dad and my mom and my brother and my sister, everybody was in the healthcare professions. And I just grew up with this ethic that you're here to contribute. And it's almost like genetic for me, because it certainly is. It goes to my father's mother, and I can, previous generations. So to abort that felt like such bad faith to me. So on a negative thing, it impelled me away from it. But in a positive way, I was moving towards. I couldn't have imagined that I'd be doing the work I've been doing for the last 10 years. But it's extremely meaningful to me. And as you and I have talked about, I wouldn't want to go back to previous, wherever I was before, because I wouldn't be bringing this experience to the work that I do. And it's right at the heart of it. So it's kind of a strange gratitude that I have, but I do feel grateful to be able to contribute, and actually in the way that I believe that you too are able to do. It feels like a grace to me.
Yeah, I think you're hitting on that when I mentioned the meaning part earlier, is that it seemed like for you, because you knew you had it there to give or to contribute, and then the meaning that you had to that contribution. Is that right?
Yeah, it's very meaningful to me. It's very meaningful to me. You know that every morning I practice gratitude, kind of a ritual I do. I learned from Refuge Recovery. It's kind of a Buddhist recovery practice. And the end of every morning's meditation is really expressing what you're saying. The deep gratitude I have to be engaged in meaningful contribution in the world to those that are most intimate to me, the ones I care most about, including you, Michael, and then to a larger circle of people that I encounter in the work that I do. To be able to be a light in the world.
Yeah. So like purpose and the meaning that has. Yeah.
I really appreciate your dropping it to this level. I didn't know where we would go, and I didn't have any certain thing in mind, but this whole topic of how to move into deeper healing, I feel like we just went right off the Kierkegaardian ledge in a really positive way, in a really positive way. I just, really appreciate you pulling it down into this issue of value and meaning and purpose. What makes, at the end of the day, what makes all of this possible? I've just started, Michael, engaging for the third time in my life in what will probably be an in-depth study of the book of Job. 40 years ago, I studied the book of Job, and then about 15 years ago, I studied it, and it's just on my own, and I read books on it, and I read the book of Job, and I journal, and I just do this, and I've begun another one. I think it's prompted by COVID, probably, and the darkness of this time and limitation. And I think also my age, turning 65 in May amidst COVID, and more aware of this last chapter of my life. And I wish you could have sat with me this morning. I was in at the breakfast table, underlining this huge commentary I have on the book of Job, and so moved by it. I'm just so dadgum moved by the commentator. But I think this is the point. What he was saying is that people look at the book of Job as looking at the theme of when righteous people suffer, or something like that. And he says that's not really what that's about at all. It's about kind of who's in charge of this show. And can we hang on through the darkness, and can we give over to whatever has ultimate value for us? The 12-step programs might call that our higher power. I'm not actually that comfortable with that term, as you know. I've talked about that. I kind of wish we called it our lower power or something. I don't know what, but whatever that is, it's something that drives us. What is my deepest value? What is my ultimate sense of purpose or meaning? And you dropped us right into this conversation, and I appreciate that. I feel like this is in the right direction to me.
Yeah, well, and I think that the other piece of it for me, it's the values, purpose, meaning, and the other one is that you're providing it here, which is community.
Thank you. Yeah.
I mean, especially now amidst COVID, when people are really having a hard time coming into community.
I think about this, Michael, and I want to talk to you about for just maybe a couple of minutes before we wind up, is that it's an odd community. I highly value it. I mean, my community right now is with you, and I'm so grateful for you in my life. And I think it's, I don't have any fantasy of it being like a mass phenomenon, but I really want to provide just the kind of thing that you and I are sharing right now. And there are people that respond to that. And that's what I aim for. And I'm one of those. I'm one of those people that want to watch people like you and me talking or participating in a group with us or reading something that you write. I'm one of those. And I don't know if is it 1% of the population? Is it 0.1%? Or even of people that are in recovery from various addictions? Is it just a small segment? I puzzle over this. It doesn't really change what I do. It's like the way I drum. I don't drum like a mainstream drummer. I never aspired to be a mainstream drummer. I just want to drum like I drum and hope that some people give a shit about that. And it's very much like this, I remember when I taught at Pepperdine, and I remember students would come in and they'd kind of look cockeyed at me, and various things would come up very early on, and I'd say, you'll have a lot of professors that teach a certain way. I don't teach like that. And so if this bugs you, just be confident that you'll have plenty of that other. And it's tricky because I you can get inflated with that, but it's like on the other hand, it's like I always aimed for the student in class that was a you. I was just honored to be in a class where there was a you. Most students kind of sort of liked me. Some students thought I was evil. That was rare, but they did. And then there would be a handful of students that would be like you and me together. And I just was so gratified to be there. That's never changed for me, you know, including here in your Vitality Project. It's like, who wants deeper healing, you know, to hell with deeper. Well, I do.
Yeah. And so when you said what % of it, you mean that appreciate the same kind of engagement?
So. Yeah, I guess so. It was prompted by you talking about community. You and I commune, and I value that. That's what I think of when you say community, is a place where one communes. And I fully realize that people commune on different vibes, different frequencies. I'm totally cool with that. I just love the place where you and I commune, and I've only ever experienced that. I'm hoping that it's interesting to a few other people. I know that it is, because I lead or participate in groups here through the Vitality Project. I just had this group facilitator training today with 4 other clinicians, and that was exceedingly rich, you know. And I lead groups in treatment centers where there'll be in a group of 5 or 6 people, 1 or 2 people that seem like they're really getting it and really appreciative, and a couple that are falling asleep, and a couple of people kind of like with furrowed brows trying to figure out what the hell's going on. I don't know. You know, and I don't know. How does all that?
I mean, I guess the last thing I'm thinking about too is sometimes the pull to be kind of more mainstream. I feel myself, you know, like there's certain ways of kind of thinking and talking about things in psychology that you're much more going to hit the bullseye in the center, or should I say the middle of this, you know, no standard deviations away or something like that. You know, and I don't know, sometimes I feel that pull, but I don't think I could do it. I just couldn't, I don't know. I mean, I guess sometimes I wish that I did, because it would be easier kind of in the middle of that. But I don't know if I could. I couldn't do it, I don't think. I wish I could, but I just can't. Yeah. It'd be easier, I guess, is all I'm saying. Like sometimes I feel like it's a bit more difficult thinking about these things a bit differently than others.
I remember when I studied Lawrence Kohlberg for the first time about 43 years ago in undergraduate, and I was quite taken by his theory of moral development, where he talked about how all of us move from pre-conventional morality, where it's I, me, mine, to following the rules, which would be conventional morality. But I was very struck by his talking about post-conventional morality, where people leave conventional morality behind, sometimes to violate, for example, laws, for the sake of a deeper value, speaking of which, and that not everybody who disobeys conventions is post-conventional. Some of them are just pre-conventional. And so he said, you have to be careful. And I liked it because he says, you can't look at somebody's behavior and designate where they are. You have to interview them. You have to dialogue with them. I was very taken by him and by Piaget, the way that they would interview people to understand their cognitive processes. They didn't give them tests, they interviewed them. Piaget called it his clinical method, you know, and Kohlberg was a student of that methodology. And so I kind of feel like that with this. I feel like that in addiction and recovery, I think particularly from severe addiction to substances like alcohol and other drugs, is that many of the people I work with are non-conventional. And in active addiction, I assume that we all more or less become pre-conventional. But I'm interested in those that either had pre-morbid post-conventionality on board, or have the potential for that and are hungering for that. And that part of what they did is very similar to me. Part of me said, fuck conventions. And part of my drinking and drugging was that. I was identified with rebellion against the conventional. It's as Jung would say, it's a poor form substitute for the real thing. It's like an antidote to the conventional, but it's a facsimile of what we really want. He says what we really want is wholeness. And I mistook my thirst for alcohol. I got that mixed up with the wholeness thing. I kind of went for the partialness thing. But I love working with people that want wholeness, that they have a thirst for wholeness. And many people I work with got derailed as it did for me, and I presume for you, Michael, it got derailed with some pretty severe addictive behaviors and so on. But I like the fact that I'm working with non-conventional people, some portion of whom have a real desire to become conventional.
To become, I'm sorry, cut out there.
To become post-conventional.
Okay.
You know,
yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah. The first course I took in religious studies in undergraduate was on the Gospel of Matthew. I was at a Mennonite Brethren university, and I was studying the Gospel of Matthew, and I loved it because it depicted Jesus as so incredibly radical. And I can still remember my professor, Howard Lowen, teaching us in those first few weeks about Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, how it is that he took the teachings of his day, the religious teachings of his day, the conventions of his day, and he radicalized every one of them. You say it's okay to do this. I say it's not okay. Or you say it's not okay to do that, and he'd radicalize it. The one that comes to mind is you say it's not okay to kill somebody. I say it's not okay to have hatred in your heart. You say it's not okay to commit adultery. I say it's not okay to lust in your heart. He just did this radicalization of every single one of those things. It didn't win him very many friends in the conventional religious community, but I think of him as an avatar. I would think of any of the religious originators, you know, whoever the historical Jesus was, and the historical Buddha, and the historical Moses, and the historical, you just go down the list. I figure that every one of them was what Kohlberg was talking about, post-conventional. That seems to be where the juice is to me.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, isn't any kind of person or movement, I mean, anything that we come to know as significant at one point was post or oppositional to something. You know, even modernism was oppositional to the Enlightenment. I mean, movement to the Enlightenment.
It's like you have pre-modern religion. The Enlightenment comes along with modernism, and it was a huge rebellion. And then you have people like Thomas Kuhn coming along in the 60s, opening up the option of yet another paradigm shift, a postmodernism. And Ken Wilber writes about postmodernism, and it only makes sense to imagine that. You and I both know some of the failings of postmodernism, you know?
Yeah.
I think of this sometimes as the people that we study in psychology were all rebels, every single one of them. Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, Carl Rogers. As nice a guy as he was so radical in what he was teaching. And then the goal is, if you meet the Buddha on the road, then you must kill him. You know, if you're going to be faithful to Jung, you must become post-Jungian. You know, and so on it goes. And that's what I'm interested in. So which is, to me, which is movement, which is fluid, which is the opposite of, it's not static. And I don't think that, you know, I'm not interested in being static, even within my perceived fluidness. I'm flashing, and I got momentarily distracted. I had a former client of mine died this summer. He overdosed and died. And I really love this man. And I hadn't seen him for a year or so. He was at a treatment center where I met him. And he always talked after he left that he would be in touch with me and want to work with me. And we just never got around that corner. And I've had 3 clients overdose and die this summer. And I really, these are all 3 really noteworthy individuals. Not everybody's noteworthy. They all 3 had already contributed a lot, had all been really set upon by severe addiction, and all 3 of them were forces of nature. And he was. And his sister found some notes that he wrote after he passed away, and there was a note that just had my name at the top, Dr. Weathers, and she wrote me. We got in contact. She wrote me, and she said he put quotes around it, and she said, "Is this a quote that you said?" And the quote was this: "We're here to evolve this fucker." That was the quote, and I felt really like, do I say yes? Because I know that I said that.
Do I claim this or not?
And I wrote back and I said, well, yeah. Yeah. And she said, that is so incredible. She says, I know why he loves you so much. It resonated for her, and we've been in some contact since then. And that would be in the context of a pretty profane men's group and very bright individuals, including this guy. I want to say his name, but I want to be respectful. But you know, we are here to evolve this fucker. You know, we really are. And I like how you put it, is like to stay fluid and to even stay fluid with my fluidity.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. I hope people can hear that. I hope the words don't offend. I hope the words jar, or as with this his sister who survived, she just laughed and she said, it feels so good to know that he appreciated you so much and that you spoke his language. If that's the only person that landed with favorably, I'm delighted, because he was one of my favorites for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I mean,
so what we're talking about, I guess, tonight is evolving, you know, evolving in recovery, that we don't get too static. I love these conversations with you, Michael, because I know you to know that will never happen for you. You know, to the day I die, you and I'll be having conversations like this, and we'll be reinventing yesterday's thoughts in today's conversation.
I hope you're right. I mean, I think you're right, but I don't know. Sometimes I get afraid. Sometimes as soon as I think that I've got it figured out, then I'll quit trying to figure it out.
Maybe our last words to each other before I pass to the other world will be something like, I don't have any idea, Michael. I don't have any idea. That'd be okay,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Just keep evolving this fucker.
Yeah. I hope we don't get too much hate mail for this. I know sometime your family watches this, and I hope that this isn't too offensive to them. I don't intend to offend them. I
probably
love you dearly,
favorite
Michael.
Part, if she's watching, it's probably your favorite part.
Okay. Well, I love you dearly. I love Michael's mom. I love your son dearly, and he's one of the good ones. And you carry it forward, my friend. You carry it forward.
Love you too, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thanks for being with me tonight. We'll be in touch these days, my brother, okay?
Yeah. Take care, Bob. Hope you feel better.
Too. Yeah, I will. Okay. Thanks a lot. Good night.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.